Hi there, my name is Lo. Welcome to my channel where I discuss everything between Hermes and grocery bags. Welcome to another edition of Tea and Thoughts. Before we get started today, I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that at this moment, as we are filming, I've reached 500 subscribers. I know that for a lot of content creators, it's only a very tiny amount, but for me, it really means the world. So let's hope it's only going upwards from here. So I just wanted to express my gratitude and thank all of you who have been with me on this journey for a longer or shorter time. I am pretty determined now to make it to 1,000 subscribers. I know it's gonna take some time to get there, but that's fine, and I usually don't like asking for these things, but if you're new here or if you haven't subscribed already, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. So then to carry on with today's topic, my eye candy for this video is this Marc Jacobs tote bag in the... They keep on changing the size names on these bags, but this is the smallest size. No, that's also not true. This is not the small size that they have because they came out with this sort of bag charm version of the Marc Jacobs tote bag, which is really cute. But I think this is the mini now, and they used to call this the micro. In any case, my eye candy on this type of video doesn't always have a point to it, but today it actually does. This bag is the only one that I have in my collection that was also cut up in a TANNER LEATHERSTEIN video. And TANNER is the topic of my video today. So there's been quite a lot of reaction videos when it comes to TANNER, and I'm quite late to the game in that sense. And watching a number of these videos, it always triggers some thinking with me. I have quite mixed reactions or mixed feelings when it comes to TANNER LEATHERSTEIN. I think a lot of us in the luxury community do, because what often sticks with me from his videos is the sentiment that he gives to them. So I know that he doesn't really like the treated types of leather. I can recall from certain videos that he says like, this is very good craftsmanship, or I like this leather type, or this is very poor craftsmanship, or this is PU on the inside. But actually a very common thing in his videos that I feel is not discussed that often is that he usually gives an estimate of what it will cost to make a bag, and then he also gives the price that he paid for it, or usually the recommended retail price of a bag. And then when you divide the recommended retail price by the cost, you will end up with a factor. And then usually if the factor is between 3 and 3.5, TANNER will say that the pricing is fair. If it's below, then it's good. And if it's above, he will say you're mostly paying here for the branding, because the price of this bag is not justified by the costs that it would take to make this bag and some of the peripheral costs that you can expect, like logistics, overhead, that kind of thing. And I am actually very much a numbers girl, so I was actually kind of insulted by myself, or for myself, that I've been so focused on TANNER's opinions rather than looking at what numbers he's putting out. So now that he's been around for a little while, I decided let's just binge watch his videos, or at least part of them. Luckily they are usually subtitled, so I could just scroll through to the interesting parts. But I figured let's just go through his videos, see what brands or what bags or what items he's talking about, what his cost estimate is, what the recommended retail price is, and what the factor is between the two of those, to see if that can also give us some insights into, are we overpaying? How much are we overpaying? Which brands may still be worthwhile, although this is a very small sample. And then towards the end of this video, I also want to touch upon like, what does this mean for resale value, especially in a market where the rise of super fakes is becoming increasingly more problematic. So going through his videos, there were about 65 of them that I found valuable or useful. So I decided to only include bags and SLGs, because occasionally he also does shoes or belts, but I think those are hardly ever in the luxury segment. There were some videos that I actually couldn't include in my analysis because sometimes he would only mention the recommended retail price and then say it's fair, but he didn't actually mention the cost estimate on creating those items, so I decided to leave those out. By the way, for the Marc Jacobs tote bag, his cost estimate for this bag was $80, recommended retail price $325. This might have actually gone up since that video, or it's just more expensive in Europe, because I think over here it's 3.95 in euros. In any case, with a recommended retail price of 3.25, the factor on this bag is 4.1. So with the Marc Jacobs tote bag in the micro size, you are overpaying according to Tanner Leatherstein. But that's also kind of the conclusion that I came to, because it's just a very small bag and you're just not getting a lot of bag for buck, so to say. What were some other things that I found doing this analysis? Well, out of those 65 videos, about half of them were considered bad value for money, including all of the luxury items and most contemporary items. So I also decided to make a split between, well, luxury, contemporary, and then quite a large segment of brands that I hadn't really ever heard of, or that I already know are not part of the contemporary or luxury space. Fortunately, 22 of the items were considered good value, so they were below that threshold of a factor 3, and then there were 11 items that were in that range of 3 and 3.5. The bags that had the worst factor were a Prada shoulder bag. It was in Saffiano leather. Then he also slayed the Louis Vuitton Félicie pochette, both literally and verbally. And the third worst was the Loewe mini puzzle, which kind of surprised me because I thought that a lot of craft would be involved in that, and that would at least compensate for the leather. Of course, it is a mini bag, so not a lot of leather is used in it. Occasionally I'm just reaching back to my laptop to have a look at my notes and switch between my Google Sheets file and my notes. But yeah, these bags were all in a factor sort of between 14.5 and 15, and then the Prada bag was really exceptional because that was 18.3, so that is crafted for, in his estimate, $120 and sells for $2,200. So as you can imagine, that is quite a markup. Another thing that I found looking at the videos of luxury wallets is that in general you're paying a massive markup when you are buying a luxury wallet. It's a tiny amount of leather. Usually they are not that difficult to craft, or because it's a small item it doesn't take that much time to craft, even though, yeah, the card slots and stuff may be intricate. But to take some examples, a Bottega Veneta bifold wallet, this was one that he absolutely didn't appreciate. Also in terms of the way it was crafted, estimated cost $40, recommended retail $650, so that's a factor of 16.3. Chanel wallet, factor of 13.3, crafted for $90, sold for $1,200. Gucci Marmont wallet, $40 to craft, sells for $515, so that's a factor of 12.9, almost 13. Again, to remind you that between 3 and 3.5 would be considered fair, 13 would be considered pretty steep. So even though you are overpaying with all of the luxury brands, if we look at this factoring, there were some bags that did do significantly better than others. Here we are talking about the Gucci Dionysus mini bag, the Bottega Veneta Arco mini bag, and the Louis Vuitton Neverfull bag. That last one was a version in empreinte leather, if I remember correctly. So these three bags were all around the factor 10 mark. So 9.6 for the Gucci bag, 10 for the Arco mini bag from Bottega, and a 10.4 for the Louis Vuitton Neverfull bag. Of course, the Louis Vuitton Neverfull is relative large amount of leather, which needs to be taken into consideration for the crafting price. The Arco mini bag from Bottega it's a mini bag, but because it's sort of double woven, it does actually contain a lot of leather. It's also more difficult to craft. And this was a bag that Tanner actually liked quite a lot in terms of choice of leather and the way it was crafted. However, at a factor 10, it is still a massive markup that you're paying just for the brand and for the design. So then looking into the contemporary space, the bags here that basically had the best factor were from Teddy Blake, Kate Spade, and Portland Leather Goods. I think these were all videos of bags where it wasn't explicitly mentioned what bag style it was. I also don't know all that much about these brands to recognize these bags, so apologies for that. Also, I do want to make a special mention to the Paulin Numéro 1 bag. I think a lot of us have also seen the videos about him slaying or taking apart this bag, and that he was actually very positive about the value for money on Paulin, or at least based on this bag. Paulin came to a factor of 2.4, so that's still well below the threshold of 3, so to say, of where the fair pricing starts. Actually being at 2.4, we might consider this Paulin bag to be very well priced. I do think they've gone through a price increase, so it might be a little bit more at this point in time. But with an estimated cost to make of $180, you can calculate for yourself at what price point this bag is still worthwhile. I think one thing that really interested me from all of these videos, more on a general level, is that leather is really not that expensive. So I feel like we talk about having good quality leather on a lot of these items that we buy in this community. And even though that might have some reason to it, like I really love the leather on this bag, and if I recall correctly, Tanner did as well. But it's not the case that we are paying for hundreds of dollars of worth of leather in a bag. Actually, leather is kind of cheap. So even for the Louis Vuitton Neverfull, the estimated leather cost was $100. And then looking at the total cost of crafting the bag, what goes into things like hardware and the labor put into crafting the bag, that's usually a lot more expensive. So unfortunately, Tanner doesn't have this very structured pattern of saying this is the cost for the leather, and this is the cost for the hardware, and this is the cost for the labor. But he will quite often mention the cost for the leather. Unfortunately, also not in every video, but in any case, on average, from these numbers I have crunched, when it comes to the cost of making a bag, about 1/3 is the cost of the leather, and then 2/3 is the hardware and the craftsmanship that's involved, so labor in putting the bag together. But of course there are exceptions, because there's nothing more misleading than a average or a mean. So definitely sometimes you're also paying more of a factor 3 or 4 when it comes to crafting a bag. We can take as an example the Coach tabby, and that's both for the pillow tabby as well for the regular, more structured tabby. Also, I think good and very important to note, none of the bags that Tanner pulled apart that he mentioned the estimated cost of making off was above $260. So none of the luxury bags, none of the luxury SLGs that he tore apart was more in his estimate than $260 to make. So if you put that onto a factor of 3.5, that puts you at $910. So if pricing was considered fair on these items, they should all be below $1,000. And of course, when it comes to these luxury bags, none of them are. So a pretty harsh conclusion from watching and analyzing the numbers on these videos is that luxury is overpriced. And I think we all realized before Tanner became a thing that luxury was overpriced. I just think that we were never presented with these facts so harshly, that we were overpaying so much for our luxury items. And by having done an analysis on these numbers, I guess I only made it worse. Because for all of these luxury items that got on his chopping block, the minimal factor that he reached was 9.6, and that's really very, very expensive. And as I already touched upon a couple of times, a number of these items have gone up in price as well. So luxury is already horribly overpriced if you're just looking at what you are paying for besides the branding. If it's just the object in itself and the leather and the craftsmanship and that kind of thing. So luxury is overpriced, and it's definitely not getting better with all of these price increases. And then on the other hand, we are also seeing decrease in quality, because in this video I'm really just talking about how much it would take financially to make a bag, but it doesn't really say anything about whether somebody's actually done a good job of crafting a bag. But assuming that whoever worked on a bag has done a good job and that the craftsmanship on an item is actually decent, if we take a broader look at what a bag should reasonably cost, it should probably not really be more than $400. The average cost of crafting the contemporary bags that he looked at and that I know as contemporary brands, that was at $108. So by factoring that 3.5 times, that's how I am getting to this approximate price point. And I do have to say, Tanner mostly looks at some smaller bags, especially the more expensive that they become. So it's definitely not to say that every bag would cost $100 to make, because we've already seen exceptions, even in mini bags, like the Bottega Arco tote, that is $250 to make, for example. So then coming to a reasonable price point, you can definitely go up a bit. So if we would take a bit more of a rougher estimate, well, depending on how much leather is being used and how complex it is to make a bag, and I get that's hard for us to estimate because we are not people who craft bags. I think you can imagine with some bags, like if it's just a tote, 2 slabs of leather sewn together, put some handles on it, that's going to be a lot easier to craft than a Loewe mini puzzle bag, or a bag that has like a lot of shapes and corners and needs to be sewn together in a lot of places, like you see in a lot of the Pollen bags. But putting all of it together and doing a bit of Tanner style, I would have to say my rough estimate of a reasonable price on a pretty bag, given what I've seen in these videos, is that we really shouldn't be paying more than 400, perhaps up to 700 if it is a lot of leather or complex craftsmanship, and perhaps some bags will be worth even 1,000 if we look at reasonable or fair pricing. But going over that, I wouldn't want to say that it doesn't make sense, because I think a lot of us are happy to pay for branding and we're happy to pay for designs that other brands don't have. But if we're being honest with ourselves, we are then paying for those things, and we shouldn't hide all too much behind the concept of we are getting something with beautiful leather that is beautifully crafted. For those things in itself, we can achieve that at a much lower price point. So one final thing I wanted to touch upon is that by paying more for design and for brand, that we are also buying items that hold their value a lot better. And although I think these are more exceptions already, I think to some extent it's definitely true. But one thing that really at least intrigues me but also concerns me quite a bit is the rise of super fakes, and especially combined with the price increases that we've been experiencing. Usually price increases were kind of working to some extent in our favor, because if prices increase, then we're also getting more in return for our luxury goods at a later point in time. However, super fakes really create massive market inefficiencies. It's kind of like buying a new car. The moment you have left the dealership with your new car, it has already drastically decreased in value. And how is that possible? Well, that is because if you are reselling your car, for the buyer, they don't know what your true motives are for reselling it, and they don't know if the car is going to have problems. Obviously, when it comes to cars, they don't have an issue with fakes, but I do think that the argument kind of holds similarly for bags. So you are going to be paying a lot of money for a bag, but as soon as you are taking it out of the boutique, it is already decreasing in value, because if you need to resell it, it's going to be harder because there's more fakes around, there's more super fakes around. Buyers are not going to be able to trust sellers that they are selling the actual thing. And yes, of course, there are authentication services, but those are also not going to be waterproof for a number of reasons. First of all, people and also machine learning algorithms, they are going to make mistakes. So you will need to go through 2-3 authentication services, especially on more expensive bags, to significantly reduce your risk of buying a fake. The second thing is that super fakes are getting better, which makes it hard, especially from pictures, to distinguish between the real and the fake thing. And also fakes are getting more extensive in this sense. So yesterday I was on AliExpress browsing articles. I actually already saw a fake Demolier Vancouver bag, and it kind of broke my heart because I had already seen it happen to bags from Pollen, and now they are also just creating fakes of a fairly low-key and still unknown brand like Demolier. So more and more variants of bags are getting replicated, and an authentication service is not always going to be such an expert that they are going to recognize a full array of bags from a full array of brands. And then the third thing that makes it hard to rely authentication services sometimes is that if you bring them items that have come out of the sort of gray market, so outlet items, items that have been used, may have some defects to them, it's going to be very hard to figure out if an item is a fake or is actually just a poor authentic one. And again, the decreasing quality on items from a number of luxury brands is simply not helping in that. I guess it's also part of the reason why I'm moving more into the contemporary space, because, well, if you jump on a brand early enough, you can still get some very nice designs and some very decent craftsmanship for what Tanner would call a fair price. And just in the raw materials and the craftsmanship of the bag, you are going to have some inherent values, although I'm also not going to trick myself into thinking that a pre-loved bag is even going to be worth that if people think that it might be a fake. Altogether, we are overpaying for our luxury bags, and we will probably just keep on overpaying more and more as prices are increasing and resale values are decreasing. For me as a buyer, I really need to consider what bags I really love, which bags I feel are a good value for me, in most part for the quality of the materials and the craftsmanship, but of course also the branding and the style, and that I need to assume that I'm going to have these bags for a pretty long time to come. Let's continue this discussion down below in the comments. What are your thoughts on this topic? Do you still enjoy buying luxury? Are these trends a concern to you? Or don't you really care because you're just buying luxury, be it bags or other items, just for yourself to enjoy? Thanks so much for watching this video today. Remember, for now there's a styling, a situation, and a taste for everything, so don't judge. Wear whatever the bag you like. As we would say in Dutch, doei! Blow out. Bye.